Isaac, and Jacob. When Donald Trump says that, I just started bawling, and my son asked me why. I'm like, I told him, look. I said, look how all recognize Hashem. And it's a crazy world to be in. When you look at what's happening on TikTok, and then you get to hear that language in our halls of politics, to me, that is the beginning of proper orientation. Hashem first, God first.
It's pretty crazy.
It's nuts, Sam.
It is nuts.
It's bonkers, and things are happening so fast that we don't have time to even take it in. Because like Donald Trump was almost assassinated twice, Charlie Kirk, all of these things. Again, one has to be very careful about this, but to me, they all are data points of something much, much greater happening.
One thing that's really funny about Trump, and this is true about US presidents in general, is sometimes I feel like Trump has more authority in Israel and Gaza than he does in Chicago. Right? Like, I don't know if you've been seeing on the news, right? You know, he's kind of having a tiff with the city of Chicago at the moment with ICE agents running around, and then the governor and the mayor trying to limit the ability of ICE people to round up illegal immigrants. And, you know, the governor of Illinois saying, I'm going to resist this tyrant, and, you know, blah, 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 blah. It seems like Trump can barely make a dent in the, you know, day-to-day operations of Chicago, but he can have near messianic transformative power on the other side of the world. And it's strange.
So, okay. So 1 second. I mentioned this earlier, but now that you mentioned that, it connects to me. So I think I might have an inkling of an idea why that's happening. And that's because I connect that to the meaning crisis. I mentioned earlier, I don't know if any of you heard this, you could stop me, but Israel, in the last 2 years, 400,000 reservist soldiers have been fighting in the war.
It's a lot for a small country.
That is like 20 million Americans fighting, which is like 5 to 6 million more Americans in World War II.
Right. That means that everybody is 1 or 2 degrees removed at most from someone fighting.
Show me one country in the world right now that would send out that level of their population to go out and fight, or that are willing to go out and fight. Ukraine. By the way, sure. You know what? I give you that. Ukraine. I don't know if the numbers.
Not Russia. Those Russians. The Russians don't want to fight in for Putin. They, you know, you can round up the prisoners, you can round up the poor and the desperate and the drug addicts. The middle class and above Russians do not want to send.
Because what do you stand for?
Yeah.
Now, I would say that in its best, or make America great again, if I'm using a Kabbalistic term, we want to take the divine sparks from that statement, right? Removing the racist ideas over there, going back to truth, going back into God we trust, going to proper orientation and meaning. And that's why when Trump speaks in that language, in the Middle East, that matters. In the Middle East, to Muslims and to Jews, he is speaking our language. There's an orientation. There's missing the mark. There's sinning and there's not sinning. In Chicago, or in the Western world, where if you look at the dictionary, the word literally now also means figuratively, then ICE, like that's the idea. ICE is there. We could quibble about, we don't have to quibble. Anything, if something's being done illegally, obviously should be called out, and all the good stuff about how we should be participating in removing illegal people. But there's this sense of like, should illegal people be removed? Yes, truth. There's an order to things. And that's why, that doesn't mean not having compassion. Right? That's how it's so inverse. They're illegal because there are illegal immigrants. There are illegal immigrants because of Judean Christian values. We, of course, understand that there's pain and suffering in the world. And we are creating a platform and a country that will allow them to succeed and want to bring them in and all those good stuff. However, it's constantly seen in this, backwards world. And that's why when Trump is speaking, it's like scratching the board. You keep on trying to tether us back to this, and maybe that's the rise of the conversation of of Christian nationalism, where we're like, we want to go back to this emet, to this truth, and obviously Israel's dealing with this as well. That's what I'm saying. Like, there's a huge surge of Jewish identity in Israel right now, and that could go very wrong. Like you hear members of Knesset saying, like, now I want that, like every institution, any building that has government funding needs to have like, this the mezuzah, the little thing that you put on the side of the doorpost.
I have one of those on my front door, not because I put it there, but because some previous owner of my house was Jewish, and I have intentionally not removed it because I kind of enjoyed being there.
Oh, you should totally have it. That's part of like the 4 Ps. We were talking about this earlier in the lesson. This is, sending out to the environment really out there.
And also when I say that, lots of my best friends are Jewish and I grew up in a pretty Jewish neighborhood, like the fact that my house has one of those, I don't even remember the word on the door post.
Mezuzah.
Yeah.
Now, I would even go to your conversation, your recent conversation right now. And this is also my response to Claire that asked, why am I wasting my time talking to these heathens?
Well, like, I might ask, why are you wasting your time responding to Claire's YouTube comments? But please go ahead.
By the way, honestly, I believe that like once I've engaged and someone wrote back to me, it also helps your algorithm. There's more engagement happening over there.
Yeah, that's my feeling with Claire. Comment away, Claire. The algorithm loves it.
Exactly. So spread the love. But my answer to her was that like, and it's happening on your conversation. So that's what's interesting to me. You are speaking to this professor who's been called a heretic and all the different kind of names, and you're this Unitarian that's speaking as well. This is the most incredible time, and me commenting on it, right, as well, and even Claire commenting on it. Where everyone's seeking, Claire, don't you see that we're all trying to talk, to connect to him, to understand him better? And once there's this kind of bifurcation, it almost allows for a unity again, because like I'm looking at us like, again, at this point, there's this midrash when the Jews went through the Sea of Reeds, it's split into 12 different sections to the 12 tribes, and each tribe had its own like sort of little channel, and they didn't see each other's legs, but they saw sort of each other. They saw each other moving towards the same direction, though. So you're not exactly sure how people are getting there, but we know we're moving towards the same place. So I'm extrapolating that towards my relationship with my Muslim brothers and sisters and my Christian brothers and sisters, which is like at this point of the game, and this is why earlier I was saying the invitation really is now to Islam to sort of join at this like last route. Like, can't you see the world is changing around you? And Saudi Arabia, that's why I'm excited about it, because there's so much still levels of corruption and issues, but that is how the boat is starting to turn. And I want to give them a language or a place to land on, which is like, I'm not asking you to now bring in woke theory into your mosque. I want you to have another mosque. Go to church and go to mosque and pray. We want that. We just need to orient ourselves properly. So again, I think in America, it's scary what's happening, but it's great. I like that anti-Semitism is on a rise in a certain sense, because again, it's the period of clarification. I want to see who my enemies are. I want to see who my allies are. I'll tell you one other crazy thing. It's nuts. Jordan Peterson, Douglas Murray having a conversation. Towards the end of the conversation, Douglas Murray tells Jordan, outside the UN, it has the verse that says, we're not going to teach battle anymore, and no one's going to fight anymore. I'm forgetting the exact. I know it in Hebrew. I'm forgetting exactly.
And the beat swords into plowshares
exactly.
Spears into pruning hooks.
Right. So Jordan's like nodding, and then Douglas Murray says, "But you know what it says beforehand? I just noticed this right now." He opens up a Bible and says that before that it says that. From Zion, the Torah will come, and the word of God from Jerusalem. And Jordan says, like, you're right. He's like, you know what that's called, Douglas? It's called a prerequisite. And Douglas says, like, before you could have peace, you have to have the first thing. Why are they saying that? Why are these two Christians, like, why? Like, it's nuts for a Jew to see that being spoken about. And that's why Trump, seeing that and Trump speaking, I have this whole crazy theory. It's even why Bibi, the figure of Bibi, for like the last 30 years, he's sort of been keeping this boat. He's been sort of deflecting the outer world. He's changed the economy over here. He's been letting Israel sort of figure itself out. But like Trump coming to the Knesset is saying, guys, time is running out. You got to step up, and you got to realize like what's in front of you. And you're not going to be able to do that as this like quasi-American, quasi like Poland, like be proud and identify as Israel, not as what Jacob hates as, let's say, the secular nation state of Israel, but as the people of Israel, which of course has political elements to that as well. But if you could do that, then I think you could go to this next stage of
Jewish nationalism. Really is.
Yeah,
I mean, I don't know what other word would be the right word for that.
But through that, but it goes back to the blessing of Abraham. It says the nations of the world, but in Hebrew it's mishpachot ha'adamah. It's the families of the earth. It's realizing it's being a nation state, but understanding having still that familial bond. And a Chinese person doesn't wake up in the morning and ask himself, like, do I have a right to exist? But Israelis still have, since Abraham decided to heed the call, we sort of have this subconscious question, should he have said yes? Why don't you just tell God, like, nah, ask someone else? We have to like justify every day Abraham's here I am. But we need to stop, stuttering about that. It's been long enough to say like, no, here I am. And because of that, that means irrigation to the region. It means oil. It means technology. It means like America, Israel, India working together. I'm taking this now to like the AI, to the technology world. If we want to take AI, CRISPR technology into using that to create the resurrection of the dead, possibly, it will only be that and not necromancy if we're oriented properly. Right now, it's like, China and other world, things are going to change rapidly. And if we don't realize how serious these things are in front of us and how we have to sort of rectify this world in that sense, it could go into chaos. It could go into a horrible direction. And I think we're being invited onto the world stage, but that requires a lot more responsibility. And we can't be playing like nonsense games. And I think that's sort of part of the tension in Israel itself. But again, that's a long ramble and a lot of speculation.
Yeah. I feel like America is funny. I feel like in some ways our self-confidence is really almost as strong as ever. America has a weird, funny, almost Israel-like self-confidence question. And, we sort of, we steal this land from the Native Americans. That slavery stuff was not so great. Blah, 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 blah. We're not even a people. We're not even an ethnic group. Are we an idea? Are we the Constitution? What exactly is America? But yet sometimes when America feels self-confident and knows what it is and wants to do things, it's just one of the most unstoppable forces there is. One thing that I think is weird is that I feel like still in America, Trump is not being given the standard legitimacy from, say, the press and the establishment and the general taste-making, sense-making, power brokers, as, even say George W. Bush was, or even like Mitt Romney was treated as a candidate, even though he was probably still somewhat mistreated, but he was still like a person who could be president, and if he were president, he'd be the legitimate president, and you could disagree with him, but he's the president. Whereas Trump has always been treated with this air of dislegitimacy or illegitimacy, right? From the the Russiagate stuff and et cetera, even though no one seems to deny that he won 2020, fair and square, or 2024 fair and square. But he's still not given the legitimacy thing. But in the rest of the world, or at least not like outside of America and the West, he is absolutely seen as legitimate and as one of the most legitimate in a certain sense, or most to be taken seriously presidents in a long time. And I feel like his speech in Israel was one of those moments, right? It's like, what U.S. president has gone to Israel and spoken with such gravitas and with such poignancy to the moment that they're coming in, right? But yet in America, it's still like we're not giving him that due. And I think that in a certain sense, he's just sort of given up on that ever happening. He's just like, I'm just going to do things, and the people who see will see, and the people who don't see won't see. But there were still cracks in that coming through, right? Like Hillary Clinton was like, look, honestly, we got to give him credit for this Israel deal thing. Like that was a big deal.
But that's a tell.
Right.
That's a tell how silent most people were about, let's say, the deal, because this is what you wanted, baby, right? No more dead, no more dead. Like the quote unquote genocide.
Yeah, bring an end to the genocide. Bring an end to the genocide in Gaza. All right, I ended the genocide in Gaza.
That's why I said
cricket.
I said this provocative comment, which is, to the world, we could either be Judas or Jesus. There's nothing between. And again, I think there's a reaction, right, to Trump, which is there's a reaction which is scary for people, right? Because you're seeing what was sort of like for the last 10 years, the second you say my narrative, or you drop narrative, like, anything goes, right? Like, my narrative is this, like and that's why Jordan Peterson is so interesting, because he really saw a lot of this sort of happening or unfolding, and going to Bill 16, like what that meant, right? Like that goes back to literally and figuratively. So Trump is that reminder. No, literally means literally, and people don't want that, and that's very, very. It's scary because we're really seeing it play out in the world. And there's moments where you're seeing this, like you had to have, and we could only see this in retrospect. Again, like God tells Moses, you can't see my face, right? You could only see my back. What if Russia wasn't fighting Ukraine? They would have time to help Iran during that. Like that whole dynamic would be different. And what if we didn't have COVID? And like all these things that like are little adjustments to moving this whole ship. Only later on can we start connecting dots and seeing how these things are unfolding. And you're saying that like on the media and the power brokers are not letting it happen. I think
they're not. They can't stop it from happening, but they're sort of stopping it from having the sense of the collective sense of importance that it probably deserves.
But this is part of Trump also winning, though, where everyone's like, no way it's going to happen, which is there's this idea in the Midrash, which is the Messiah is already here. We don't know who he is. He doesn't even know himself who he is. But like, if we knew who he is, it would allow the light to focus on him. And that's why he's really in this shell of unholiness. And when the time is right, he'll be able to sort of sprout. But that shell is really protecting him. What I mean is that the poison you hear in the news, the insanity you hear, that is a lot. Like if the real leader emerged right now, let's say in Israel, or let's say if the TLC, so to speak, had too much light on it, then it would crumble. But instead, there's so much noise happening that it's allowing underneath the radar new things to percolate. And because there's so much noise, it's allowing, like, this might be a stretch, but like a Barry Weiss move taking over of CBS News, that's like under the radar, suddenly boom, because there's switches, things change, the podcast, bam, 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 and that allowed to happen because everyone's focusing on other stuff or doing other noise that's going on. So we could look at it as like something horrible, or we could look at it as no. Because of all this craziness, it allowed podcasts to grow, which allowed Sam, the Unitarian, to have a discussion like he had yesterday and grow a channel. Like that can't happen. Or whether it's Redeemed Zoomer or whether it's Jordan Hall talking to, like, all that thing, that couldn't happen if there was a focus on it. So and let's say Jordan Peterson took a lot of that heat in a certain sense, right? That he was taking on him, but that was allowing so much to grow underneath. And suddenly, like the biblical series, right? Like you were saying, I think back in the day, or many of us feel like, are the Jews or the Christians or like, in the room, can you hear what this guy's talking about? And if that was center stage off the bat, if he started with a biblical series, then it would have been trashed. But it allowed that to happen sort of underneath the surface, if that makes any sense.
Mm-hmm. I really like the Kushner idea of splitting governance over the West Bank. It could be an East and West Germany thing, but then it becomes even more apparent what the limitations of Hamas are.
So he's referring to this idea of splitting it, sort of like the Berlin Wall, right? And then like they'll get to see how it's like, quote unquote, on the West. The problem with that is that model, I would say, is that, again, that's putting a Western frame saying like, don't you understand? All they want is just like to work and be free. it's not so simple. People need to realize that, like, especially
because East and West Germany was a disagreement over economic philosophy, but they were fundamentally both German. Whereas this is a split between two peoples. And so what are you going to do? Like, you can't just, it's not like, oh, we're going to sacrifice our communist identity and embrace capitalism, which ended up happening. You can't sacrifice your Palestinian, Arab Muslim identity. That's just not going to happen, right?
I think that will happen, actually. That, again, that doesn't mean, I think that results in Arabs living more free than ever in the land of Israel, which includes Arab ministers and, like, the whole array of things. I think it could be amazing. However, I do think it does require giving up. Again, it's complicated. I could see a version where it means giving up the Palestinian identity and merging back into a larger Arab identity. I do think, though, for that conversation to happen, Israel does have to recognize the concept of the Nakba, which means, like, we do need to realize that, like, there's a lot, because of our trauma, there's a lot of trauma you suffer trauma as well. And again, the Bible talks about this. You were a foreigner in Egypt. You are the ones that are supposed to be sensitive to the trauma. So, of course, again, it's a feature. You're dealing, when you come back to the land, which is so biblical, you're dealing with the other thing that is hammered on in the 5 books. You have a foreigner in your land. And I would say this, in a certain sense, is the last, I believe, I hope, is the final move. The final move is unity. Can we unify in Israel? Can America unify? Like, can we as people see each other, make space for each other? And if we can, I feel like we can move on to the next stage. And I feel like that is that test right now. We need to see if, like, can it actually be done? Really, this is the whole story of Genesis. The fighting between the brothers constantly, right? Cain and Abel, Ishmael, Adam, Esau, like fighting, all the way to Jacob and Joseph and his brothers. And then even at the end, when he forgives them, right? Jacob dies. The brothers bug out. They're like, oh man, now he's going to kill us again. He tells them, chill out. I love you. It's all good. Only when that happens, that is, correcting Cain and Abel, as in unity is possible. Only then is there a reason to continue with the other books. Because if we didn't get to unity, it would be like, forget it. The idea is that is possible. And ultimately, that's what we need to be doing right now. But again, to what Neil was saying, we have to realize that there's 20 years of indoctrination, heavy, crazy indoctrination. So I don't see even Hamas as evil. I see them as evil possessed. That doesn't mean they don't have to be stopped, but it's not like it's an evil DNA. It just means it needs mass.
We wrestle not against flesh and blood.
I don't know if that happens from a wall. Like, people, there's a crazy story, but people have heard it, but like, woman, terrorist, tries to kill Israel, helps her, takes care of her, does surgery for her, does all these stuff, takes care of her in the hospital. She leaves, finally healed, comes back, only to be able to do it again. And you're like, no, it's more, it's deeper than that. It's not just like I need a job or I need some money. For the last people, in the cities that were massacred, the little kibbutzim that were massacred, for 20 years, you had Palestinian Gazans coming in from Gaza, working there, sitting at the table, enjoying the meal. They had, and in their clothing, we found maps, who lived in each house, where time did they went to work, if they have a dog, how many kids, how do you get there? So that's the reality that we can't ignore that. It doesn't mean all Arabs. It doesn't even mean all Gazans. It just means we can't be Pollyannish about it. I please God, inshallah, we'll be able to dance together, because like I really truly believe we only move forward together with them. I hope it can be done properly.
Yeah, I hope so.
Well, I mean, do you tell me, what do you like? Does it cause you attention when I speak about it this way, like about like Israel or about like Judaism, or like, are you like, I wonder as a Christian, like what are you hearing when I'm talking?
Well, so what I'm hearing, I
my dad and I had a talk recently about eschatology, and I still sometimes scratch my head over how this is all going to fit together. And part of me, you were talking about, the preamble to that verse about spears and plowshares was, the word coming out from Zion or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And part of me is like, this is always the weird thing of how a Christian is supposed to understand and relate to Judaism now. Am I supposed to be really happy and hopeful about all these changes in Israel, or is it the setting of the stage of the Antichrist? That's always the question that's going on in the back of the mind of a Christian. Yes, we want Jews to be happy. Yes, we want Jews to flourish. Yes, we want Israel to be in a state of peace. Watch out it is sort of the message. And I like the question of, a Jewish temple is, I think, really, really the lightning rod of how do our hopes and dreams reconcile together. Because there is a Jewish longing for a temple, and there is a Christian warning that says that the person who rebuilds that temple will try and make himself God.
So, first of all, thank you for articulating that and sharing that. Not always so simple to do that. And the only way the temple gets built is if we all want to build the temple. And then we'll build it. That's the miracle. The miracle, it goes back to the unity. The miracle is that we want to build it together. And we don't want to build it yet. And that's why it's not being built. And obviously
there's also a certain building in the way.
But I mentioned that here. At this point, let me go back for a second. You're saying I'm speaking to my dad. I'm asking about this, and I'm scratching my head. And I would say, like, we're right now at the period of, like, that's it. We've reached the limit of how we can understand how this is going to unfold. And now we're seeing things are like rapidly happening so fast on multiple levels: the technological level, a political level, a social level, and it's sort of time to buckle your seatbelt in a certain sense. But also loosen your collar, which I feel like get into positions, but realize it's more complicated than we thought it was going to be. We see who's at the finish line right now, as in, like, I'm saying the brothers have come together: Adam, Ishmael, Israel. I would even say even the Eastern religions have their own mix into this, which they're slowly coming together to the oneness behind all things. And I think, Israel has questions, which is like, okay, now that we're here, what does that mean, right? Like, how do we actually manifest? Christians have, like what you're saying right now, like, okay, like Trinity, like, what does it actually, like, I'm trying to understand what this means. And there's this Christian mass that's growing, and there's a whole question with Christians themselves coming back to orthodoxy, which is who we are. And that's that whole conversation, the language is happening. And clearly we see in the Islam world also this major confusion. So I think that's also part of the feature is we're now in a moment where the lines are more blurred, in that sense, where it's like there's an uncertainty with regards to everyone. And because there's uncertainty with regards to everyone right now, it forces us to look at others people. Paul once said this of, like, different people picking up their flags. It requires us to now sort of like look across and be like, wait, how are they doing? How are they doing? Because now it's fair to use them as a barometer and a point of orientation. For the longest time, it's like these guys are gone on this and that. Now the questions about, like, replacement theology. There's a whole conversation with Pete and Matt C. and Yosef of, like, that whole conversation. I don't look at that as scary. I look at that as blessed, which is like, yeah, we have to ask. If you're saying you're Israel and I'm saying I'm Israel, like, okay, like, what does that mean? But it means that at the very least, as long as it's with love and making space from the other, then we could, like I'm saying, those channels in the Sea of Reeds. We know we're walking towards the mountain of God. And when I tell my Muslim brothers and sisters, for right now, I don't want to knock down any Dome of the Rock. We all just want to pray there together. It's like the prophet says, it's a house of prayer for all people. It's not even called the temple anymore. It's called the house of prayer for all peoples. At this moment, let's all pray. When the Messiah comes, if you say when Jesus comes, when the last Mahdi comes. And Maimonides even gives the words for this. Like he says, at the end, the truth will reveal itself. Who are we to challenge Hashem, Allah, or God, right? When he comes and he calls the shot, we will all bend the knee and say yes. If it means in the end we all have to put on like a kafia, I guess that's the way it went down. But now I'm done quibbling with no, in verse X it means Y, and it doesn't mean a virgin. But if you look at they did that. They did the heavy lifting right now. Now we're at a place where it's okay. The high level of prophecy that Moses got to was knowing that there's a limitation to his knowledge. And when he comes back from the mountain and his face is shining and he puts on the veil, he's allowing the Israelites to experience that as well. You could see me, but there's also a cover. What I experienced above is a little version of what you guys are experiencing right now. You could see me, but you can't fully see me. There's always a limit. If you were hoping that on your interview, on your last podcast, he's going to be like, in verse X, it means Y. And now you're like, oh, it all clicked. And suddenly Jesus pops out of the screen, right? Yeah. Now it's time to, I think, how do we work together? And again, that's why TLC for me is such a magical space, because I didn't see, and why Jordan Peterson it was amazing, because it universalized that language in a certain sense for many, 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 many people. And it allowed everyone to remember there's a common language that we're speaking, the common language that we're talking about. So the confusion is a feature.
The confusion is a feature. One thing that you were talking about earlier that was striking my imagination was in the Gospels, Jesus is strangely coy about whether or not he's the Messiah. And I think that, and this causes Christians to come to all sorts of weird conclusions.
To both to speaking to the Romans and to speaking to the Jews. Yeah,
even as apostles. And obviously at one level, back then, to go around saying you were the Messiah was basically an act of sedition against the Romans. And they knew full well what that meant, and they'd already killed a bunch of them, right? And so you can't go around openly saying that. But what you said, there's always a Messiah at any given time, and that we don't know who he is and he doesn't know who he is, right? And Jesus would often talk about the Son of Man this, the Son of Man that, Son of Man this, Son of Man that. And it's unclear. It's why are you talking? Is he, Christians are why is he talking in the third person? But I think that if you think about it the way that you were describing, and imagine that there was some sort of similar belief and expectation of humility with respect to that question of who the Messiah is, even if it might be yourself, it makes a lot more sense the way that he was acting. And one of the few times where he'll admit to being the Messiah is in his trial scenes. When Pilate says, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And he'll say something like, "You have said it," right? He can't say it himself. It needs to be said by others about him.
Boy, listen. There's a very controversial or line in the Zoharic in the Kabbalah literature, which is Am Yisrael Kucha Brichu V'Oraita Chadem, which means the nation of Israel, or the people of Israel, the Torah and God are all one. You could understand how for Jews that becomes a very scary idea suddenly. But even Rabbi Kook or Rabbi Nachman, these are figures. Rabbi Kook is a good example of this, which is the idea of the tzaddik, of the righteous sage. Again, one has to be very careful about this. They're not saying that they're God, but they're saying that if you fully orient yourself properly with the commandments and all the stuff, then you become that revelatory channel from Sinai again. And you are connected to God. And because of that, the people that are connected to you are experiencing that. So in that sense,
that's what David Bentley Hart's trying to say, except he's still clinging on to some last vestige of Trinitarianism, I think, and unwilling to go the full 9 yards of his own, the own logical conclusion of his train of thought. right?
But that's why it's potentially, I mean, there's even our sages talk about how, in every tribe, in every house, there's like a little Messiah, and that's a lowercase Messiah, not a capital case Messiah. So like there's a political figure, but Judaism really downplays that and says it's really about the collective. Ultimately, it's about the collective. We are all the people of Israel, which is the Torah, which is God. And that's the note I wrote on your thing, which is there's no void, there's no space void of you, basically, which is like there's a recognition of everything. And again, those are scary ideas. And that's why I wouldn't discuss that with my son right now about does Rabbi Cook think ultimately he's sort of a manifestation of God? Because that's too much to unpack to a child, like what that means, and a Jewish child and a Jew in that context. But the phenomenon of Jesus is not like it didn't sprout out of nowhere, right? There's a mythical element to that, which it's very, very strong, which is very different, let's say, potentially from the historical Jesus of, let's say, what happened over there and what that idea means. Then it gets very scary when we take an idea and there's a whole doctrine around that, right? Which is obviously your attention. But I would say when I see you participating and I see those kind of conversations, I don't see that as sacrilege. I see that for heaven's sake. And I see that as a Christian trying to understand this experience that he has right now. And if that means I need to dig deeper and prod and things like that, but I think that ultimately leads to a deeper connection to God. Even that means certain layers are being peeled off, which is scary.
Yeah.
But again,
like Anselman was criticizing me in the in the comment section, of course, as he always says, but for having a theology that was basically a work in progress. I'm like, well, what kind of theology would you rather have? Would you rather have one that's a work in progress, or would you rather not be progressing and working on it? That doesn't mean that we can't be sure of certain things or something like that. But
that is told explicitly to Moses when in the burning bush. Abraham and the forefathers knew me as El Shaddai. You know me as the Tetragrammaton. There's a progression to these things. And when we pray in the silent prayer, we start with the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Why not just the God of the forefathers? Because we're recognizing each one of them had a different understanding of you. So I'm locking into all of theirs, tapping into all theirs. And there's my understanding of you, 2025. These are all stacked upon each other. There's this crazy midrash, the time traveling midrash. God takes Moses on in a time machine to show him all these different sages of all the generations. And he gets to Rabbi Akiva, and he's sitting in the study hall, and he's sitting all the way in the back, as in he's considered like a lowly student. And Rabbi Akiva is talking, and Moses has no idea what's flying, right? There's advanced mathematics as far as he's concerned. And he feels very weakened by this. He's like, I'm Moses, and I have no idea what's happening over here. And then one of the students asks Rabbi Akiva, how do we know this? And Rabbi Akiva says, this is Moses' Torah. We know this from Moses from Sinai. This is our tradition. And then Moses feels better about this because he realizes that this is clearly part of a progressive revelatory experience that's going on. As in the root is still mine. However, it is already manifested in something else. But as long as they're tethered still to the root, even if I don't understand it, I recognize it as true already at that point because where it's connected to. So, of course, there's a new understanding. So your uncertainty, I wouldn't say, and this is why I think when we talk about the TLC as play, I think there's a deep meaning there too. In the Talmud, they would do sometimes, if rabbis got to this point where they can't take the conversation any further, they would stop, crack some jokes, and then continue. Because humor or play allows us, think about dark humor. It allows us to
escape out of a frame. Yeah,
exactly. And because of that, we could break through to this new idea. So you saying I'm in this middle of this conversation, and even jokingly talking to in your podcast, the sense of of how it's relaxed, even though you're talking about the most fundamental things, I think that allows you to play with it, and the freedom to do that. That is allowing you to move, I think, The Torah says, turn it around and turn it again. Like keep on digging into it and conversing it and looking at these lines and learning new insights from these lines. If we stop doing that, then Sinai is dead, or Sinai is stagnant. And we've lost revelation 2,400 years ago. In order to keep this vessel prepared to accept revelation again, we must keep on participating in the word of the living God. And so getting to new insights or by the way, which is different than doctrine or practice, right? There's how I'm acting, right? And I understand that there's protocols to certain things. Even if I understand that, let's say, this commandment or this thing is no longer relevant, there's different questions of how I would interpret that or how I have to act. But definitely, as far as your theology or what you're thinking about, I think people need to constantly be not challenging, but honestly, I mean, that's the name of Israel, right? Challenging and wrestling with God. So why would that be problematic? I'm asking.
No, I got to go. I've got a meeting in like basically 0 minutes. Although I will say, unnamed Christian apologist X, who I will not name, in my private correspondence one time told me, Sam, I'm never going to change my mind on this. And I was just like floored. I was just like, I found that so offensive to the pursuit of truth that I almost couldn't believe they said that.
The opposite of what Maimonides starts his whole work with, which says, accept the truth from he who said it, which is working off of Aristotle, but basically saying like truth is truth.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I appreciate the conversation, Sam. Hopefully
I appreciate your time, Chezi. I always enjoy talking with you.
Middle East. We'll talk, dude. Take care.
Right. God bless.
Such a nice conversation with Sam. What a rock star.